Hey guys, and welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am your co-host, Ray Russell here, and this week on the program, we're going to begin to do the deep dive back into Bob's time in the Knoxville territory. It's been a long time coming. We're finally there. Bob Roop arriving in Knoxville, Tennessee, circa 1978. And in fact, going to make a short stop in Florida along the way. But in order to get to all of that and so much more, let's bring him back onto the program. Here he is, the man himself, the man with all the stories, Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, thanks, Ray. It's good to be back with you on the air again. And those of you listening out there, thank you for being here with us again. You know, when you're looking back 40 and 50 years, sometimes a lot of the details get removed or whatever. So, but we'll do the best we can.
That's what we always try to do here, the very best we can. I think we do a pretty damn good job. We had fun time last time talking about random names from the past, from Don Morocco to Ricky Steamboat. I'm sure a lot of fans out there were waiting for some of those names to come up to light, and they did last week, and we got some good feedback on those, and we'll do more shows like that in the future. Again, as we've been scrolling through your career, starting in 69, now moving into 78, by the way. Wow. And not counting Mid-South, too. We covered Mid-South at length, 4 episodes covering the Mid-South territory. I have jotted down a ton of names, probably still over 100 names that we haven't even mentioned here on the show that you likely came in contact with. Now, you may not have stories for some of those guys, but I have to think that you do have stories for at least a few. So I'm looking forward to doing that in the weeks to come. But right now, as promised, or somewhat promised at the end of last episode, we're going to slowly creep into your story involving Bob Roop's time in the Knoxville territory. But before we get to Knoxville, you make another brief stop off back in your, we're going to call it your homeland of Florida, because you seem to keep going back to where you know, and that's Eddie Graham's Florida territory. And what I'm talking about, guys, is we did that 3-part story several episodes ago, Bob, on your time in San Francisco, working for Roy Shire. And the jig was up, so they say, at the end of 1977.
Let's put it this way. Roy Shire's, the promoters in 3 of his towns, one of them came to me, and then I found out that 2 other of the local promoters were on board too, because I was controlling the talent. First time in all the time that Shires had his territory, that he wasn't running everything with a steel fist. I was in charge of the talent, and they came to me trying to get out from under Shires' domination, because he was very, very, very difficult to work with. It was just, you left even a 5-minute meeting with Shires feeling somehow dirty by having been there with him, because he just was so unpleasant, and you just felt like, oh, boy, that's 5 minutes I really wasted in my life being with this guy. But anyway, what happened after I left Shires? I want to go back just quickly before getting to Knoxville or to Florida, back to Florida.
Right.
I was through in San Francisco, but I was booked. I said this before. I'll make it short. I was booked in a main event with Andre the Giant in Los Angeles. I drove into town, and I called to find out the particulars of where and when, and I found out that Shires had gone to the Athletic Commission and gotten my license to wrestle suspended by claiming that I had taken money from it. So that match was canceled, which to this day kind of grinds me. But what I had to do, I was kind of at loose ends, because in 28 states in the country, if your license is suspended anywhere from an athletic commission, it's suspended everywhere. So in 28 states, like New York, for example, I wouldn't have been able to wrestle. So I needed to look at some way to get my license back. So I stuck around California. I was in Los Angeles, and a suburb of Los Angeles called Van Nuys, with Jay York, one of the Alaskans, Jay York. Right. I was staying with him, and I waited for the next Athletic Association meeting. They had a meeting once a month, and I waited for the next one. I stuck around California for that reason only, and I drove up to it was in Sacramento. So I drove up from Los Angeles to Sacramento, and I went to the Athletic Commission meeting. I was just very lucky, because one of in fact, the presiding officer in the Athletic Commission was an Olympian track star, Olga Connolly. Maiden name was Corbett, but she had married a hammer thrower from the United States Olympic team named Harold Connery. So I wasn't wasn't going to be allowed to be heard because I wasn't on the agenda before the meeting started. But when they took a break after about 2 hours, I went up to her, told her the situation, and she very kindly, once they went back into operation for the next session, she brought it up and very quickly just said, we found that Mr. Roop has presented a story that, a defense. Is there any debate about giving him his license back? And there wasn't. So I got my license back, and that was important. As soon as that happened, I drove back to Florida. I got back down there. I wasn't really planning on going to work there, but I went by the wrestling office, and they jumped on me they were so happy. I think they needed some new talent. I'd been out there for a while,
right?
And I had a lot of heat when I left. They were really happy. In fact, they put the belt on me, the Florida heavyweight, and that's the main belt in Florida, Florida heavyweight title, only because it's the one that's used the most often. Well, the tag team title too, but it depends on who has them. If the people who have them are drawing money, then it could be the tag team title. So I went back there, and from a prior episode that we had, I talked about Shires coming back from a promoters convention in Las Vegas and telling me that Eddie Graham had told him, when asked about me by Roy Shires, him telling Eddie Graham that I was giving him problems with, being obedient to his wishes. And Eddie had ribbed him, I guess, and me by disclaiming that I was basically just a coffee carrier. I hadn't been a booker. I'd been just carrying coffee around the office. Well, Eddie was ribbing. Now I look at it now. Eddie was ribbing Shires just to put him down. But it pissed me off at the time. I mean, it offended me. So when I went back to Florida, I couldn't hardly tolerate being around Eddie Graham. He was so friendly and big smile and beaming. He was so glad to see me, and because he started me and he assumed that everything was all right.
Mm-hmm.
And really, in actuality, it should have been, except for one fact that he still was a lousy payoff man. But after about a month there, I just realized I didn't like it. I just never had a feeling of being comfortable there. So I had the title. I remember Jerry Briscoe was helping out in the office there, and like he may be assistant booker himself. And I went to him one night and said, Jerry, I'm going to give my notice. I'm just not happy here. And I ended up there, and we had talked about how you had asked me if I remembered how I got to Knoxville, and I thought about it for a while, and then I let it sit, and it came back to me. There was a wrestler there named Terry Gibbs. Terry had wrestled in Knoxville before he lived in Tampa. So he was back in Florida for a couple of weeks, and he was booked. And so I saw him, and we were talking. He was a nice guy and a friendly guy, nice to talk to, and I hung around with him a little bit outside the business or outside the matches, which was rare. He mentioned Knoxville, and he talked about it. What he talked about, it was so attractive. He talked about short trips. You never drove more than like 100, 110 miles, which was just unheard of in Florida. You had 500-mile trips 3 days a week. So that sounded great. And I knew Ron Fuller, and I knew Robert Fuller. Not Robert so much, but I knew Ron. I helped break him in. So I called, and he accepted me. And looking back on it, I mean, I didn't look at it this way at the time. But looking back on it, I had developed into one of the top young, let's put it this way, young wrestlers, heel wrestlers in the country. I mean, not against people like Johnny Valentine or somebody who'd been around and been doing it for a long time, who are well established, but someone coming up.
I totally agree with you, because we go back and look at what you did in Florida for that 2-year span, 2+ year span, and then you go out and you main event with Kevin Sullivan in San Francisco for much of the last year as well. So I think the last 3 years, you go back to the territory era, you're certainly there now. Like, you can be used as a top heel in the territory system. So I totally get where you're coming from there.
Well, the other ingredient is everything every promoter is attuned to is how is business? What kind of money are you drawing? And the fact that I went out there and with Kevin's help, of course, we tripled. Did we triple the house, the amount of money drawn at the
just
Cow
about
Palace?
Yeah, once the feud took off, you guys just about tripled what they were doing prior to.
Well, that's what I mean. Everybody in the country knew that. I mean, all the promoters kept track of, who was drawing what, or not the promoters, the boys, all the guys. Guys are always talking. Promoters would know that. And well, who drew the money? Well, it would be Bob Roop and Kevin Sullivan. Now, of course, that's not fair because there's always a supporting card that helps. But being that we were the main event, we would get let's put it, the lion's share of the credit.
Right.
So I was going to say a hot commodity, but I was certainly going to be welcome because I was in great shape physically. I'd lost all my my baby fat. I was down to about 220, and I had the red, white, and blue, and I looked good. I had all my hair and teeth, and a lot of things that are long gone now. But when I called Ron Fuller, and also I knew Ron Fuller, helped break him in, and when I did help break him in, I didn't hurt him. I trained with him and Slater and Mike Graham, and I didn't hurt any of those guys. I didn't do a Stu Hart number on them. I was showing things. If I show them a front face lock, I would only, or a car gotch, I wouldn't crank it up so much that they were screaming. I would crank it up to the point where it was tight and they could feel the pressure, and I'd tell them, and then I'd have them practice on each other. Show me that they knew how to do it right on me, and then I'd have them practice on each other. But so anyway, I treat those guys with respect and consideration, so I could call Ron, and I could, he didn't have a grudge against me for having abused him from the get-go. He was glad to have me come in there, and I was glad to go. I wanted to get away from Florida. It just had some unpleasant memories.
Right, yeah, so you still really didn't get over, well, I mean, obviously the pay issue there in Florida, you weren't really happy with that when you left to go to San Francisco. But while you're in San Francisco, the rib comes out, or whatever you want to call it. Roy Shire's not really happy that the first time ever his booker's actually trying to book the territory rather than just kind of be, I don't want to say yes man, because I know Pat Patterson was a hell of a finish guy, and I'm sure he had his say in a lot of things he did specifically. But in general, Roy Shire would also have his say in what was going on. When you took over, you really wanted to basically run the show as far as booking the matches, booking the stories, booking everything. Yep. And Roy Shire wasn't used to that. So he calls up Eddie Graham, another promoter in the NWA, and he says, "What the hell is going on with this Bob Roop guy?" And Eddie Graham kind of jokingly in his own mind saying, "Well, I don't know what he's doing to you, Roy. You must be a shitty promoter because over here, Bob Roop, he just carries the coffee," which was funny. You were doing the secondary towns to Harley race, I do believe, when you were assistant booking with Harley in the office. Now you go and get your full-time booking job. It just kind of falls into your lap out there in San Francisco. We know everything goes awry by the end of 77. You leave after the first week of 78, the situation in LA where you get reinstated, and you go back to Tampa and you work your first show, I believe, somewhere later in February. And your first match back there in Florida is against Terry Gibbs. You're going to work Terry quite a few times here over the next 6 weeks, it looks like, in Florida. You defeat Rocky Johnson. You're back in the town for 2 weeks. And you talk about, man, boy, Eddie Graham seemed happy that I was back. No kidding. Florida heavyweight champion 2 weeks back. It's not like they had that planned months in advance, defeating Rocky Johnson there in March. But like you said, it just wasn't cooking for you. You weren't really happy there. You couldn't get over your issues with Eddie at that point in time. And so just a couple weeks later, you dropped the belt to Jack Briscoe. Right.
Well, the main thing, again, was I talked about it on last episode, that the pay. So if I was unhappy with the pay, I knew it was going to be the same. I mean, that was just, like I say, the guys, my peers, like Jack Briscoe, don't get me wrong, this isn't a knock on Jack, but Jack accepted it too. Now, he had some other things going.
Right.
He had businesses. He had private auto body shop that they probably made at least a decent living from for all the way back 50 years ago. So they had something going that the wrestling was not their only income. So Jack, and plus Jack had a home there and in Florida, and so and Florida's a great place to live if you can afford, if you got a nice place and all that. But I want to go back just one thing about Shire and Eddie Graham having a conversation about me. You had said got on the phone, but that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it's a knock, but what makes it so effective was that it was actually at the promoters convention in Las Vegas.
Oh, okay, I got you. I stand corrected. I apologize.
No, not at all. You got Matt. You got a million facts in your head, and I got about 3. So, believe me, you're doing great. I'm very able to keep up with you. So, I think what he did, I think he probably did it when a bunch of the promoters were sitting around.
Oh, okay.
I can just see Cyrus pounding on their table and saying, "Hey, Graham, what did you send me this Roop for? A guy, a hard-headed guy, he won't listen to me. He won't do what he's blah, blah, blah." And Eddie ribbed him in front of all the other promoters. I'm sure that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always try to figure out why people do things. And that would be the opportunity for Eddie to rib Shire. And that's the main reason he did it. Well, Eddie didn't think anything about that. He didn't think that Shire was going to come back and use that to try to gain, to make me more amenable to his wishes. So I think that's how that happened. But that really backfired on Eddie because it soured me on him. But the main thing, and you mentioned this also, of going back there, of course the pay was the same. And I had expressed being very unhappy about it. I mentioned it ate away at my self-respect. So here I am going back to the same thing, getting, again, cheated in a sense of, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% of what I've got coming. And I just decided I didn't want to, I didn't feel, I wasn't happy. I guess that's the best way to put it. Even with the belt and, being on top and being, like, I'm not a celebrity, but I mean, being featured and all that, it's heady. I mean, especially if you spent years and years working your way up to that level. But I just wasn't happy. And so I decided to leave and go somewhere new. And that's how I ended up getting out of Florida. And I never went back until we went opposition to Eddie Graham. Well, we'll get into that later. So I went off on a sidetrack there. Bring me back to the main path again.
No, yeah, we're heading, we're leaving Florida and we're off to Knoxville is what we're doing right now. And your very first date, from everything, all the research I did, I could find, you kick off the month of May in the Knoxville territory. Your first opponent is one Tony Charles. What a way to get going.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Tony we talked about it before, with great hand in the ring. I mean, one of the best people around in person, in life, in real life, just a sweetheart. Really great guy. Real great talent in the ring. When I went in there, I knew who was there, but I didn't really know any of the guys real well. I ran into Ronnie Garvin. I think the first night I was in there, I had heard about this place, this bar that all the boys went to, and I went down there, and I ran into Ronnie, and we hung around for that night. We went out and did some fairly exotic things involving a few of the groupies, and and just Ronnie was trying to impress me, I guess, with his status, because he was over there. He was really a big draw there.
Yeah.
And so, there'd be a room full of maybe 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 ladies of the ring, the followers. Ronnie could go through and say, okay, how about you and you and you? Meet me upstairs in the motel room.
Wow.
And you and you and you would be glad to do it. So, yeah, having Ronnie there, and then Malenko was also there.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out there as a babyface. The heel side was fairly well represented. I was happy to be there. What it was featured for was short trips again. You weren't on the road all the time. I think they had Sundays off, so which was unusual. Florida had started working 7 days by that time, 7 days a week. So yeah, it had a lot of benefits. Very, again, I had a decent relationship with Ron because, I respected his position anyway. here he was a fairly young guy. He'd been only in business in a few years. Now, of course, there's that nepotism thing of where, his family and his connections were what allowed him to get that promotion. It wasn't like he went in there and took it from somebody. Mm-hmm. Sort of, opened up for him, but he had done well with it. He'd run into a few bumps along the way. He liked to do as much cash business as he could. Any shows that didn't have like an official, like buildings that didn't have their own box office, he would run shows where he had his own ticket sellers and ticket takers.
Right.
And then he would deal in cash. He would pay in cash. Like the building cost, say a building cost was 10%, and he drew $10,000, so he would give the building $1,000 in cash rather than write a check to him. That backfired on him a few times because at least one story I heard was that he didn't put all of the money in the bank, because if it's in the bank, then it's on record. He kept a lot of money. I guess maybe he needed to have cash on hand for some reason, but he had a safe, a small safe, like maybe 2 feet square, in his apartment. Apparently, somebody broke in one time when he was out of town, and stole the safe, stole the whole thing, took off with it. Yeah, there's problems when people know you got cash on hand.
Sure, most certainly, especially that kind of money, man.
Oh yeah, that's a real temptation. Oh, he takes money, puts it in a safe, and where does he that? He doesn't. Oh, it's not a safety deposit box. Oh, it's a safe in his apartment.
Right.
Oh, you don't have his address, do you?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people found it one way, shape, or form, and that's a crazy story. I mean, when you think about it, at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm just busting in somewhere and trying that, especially with a wrestling promoter. But I guess it worked out in somebody's advantage. Whoever went in there and had the balls to go pull that off, anyway.
Well, I don't know if Ron Fuller even had an office. Every time I went to talk to him, I went to his apartment.
Okay.
That wasn't like in Florida, you had the snake pit, and Houston, you had Paul Bosch had his office, and
Ron had two sides to the territory too. For anybody who isn't aware, Southeastern was in Knoxville, but he was also running down in Alabama at the same time. So Ron would go back and forth for long periods of time, and maybe that has some. Maybe he had like a mobile office of sorts. Maybe just use the TV studio, and I don't really know. I mean, I wasn't there. But yeah, I could see where you're saying, because I remember as you're telling me that you don't think he had an office. I'm not saying he didn't, but in the past when we've discussed Ron, you're always like, well, I had to go over to his apartment. Almost all of your meetings seem to take place in Ron's apartment.
Yeah, and there's a factor involved with having an office. Office always usually has a desk, and the desk is a symbol of authority. Someone who's sitting behind the desk is a traditional sign of, superiority in that particular office or that particular spot. The guy sitting behind the desk is the one in charge, obviously. Even if you're coming there and you're a multimillionaire or whatever, you're still talking to the person who's the boss there in most cases. Now, if you're someone who hired and put this guy in place, of course, it's different. So Ron, I guess Fuller didn't want to have the expense. If he had one in his apartment, like in a bedroom or something, I never saw it.
Okay.
But I certainly never saw the safe. I always talked to him in his apartment. I remember talking to him out in the living room, which was kind of weird, some of the things we were talking about. But,
a little different from the other territories anyway.
Well, that expression, fast and loose, it was kind of the way he ran it. Again, by doing as much business as he could in cash, just leaves so many avenues to take advantage of in buildings that have box offices. A lot of times, the ticket situation is that when people buy a ticket, of course, it's recorded. The tickets have a number to them, and when the people hand their tickets in to a ticket taker, a lot of times there's a machine there that you actually put the tickets into, that records those tickets going in and being received into that machine. That way you can keep track of them. If there's any nefarious business, double selling tickets or that kind of thing. But a lot of buildings have at least like an arena, a basketball arena, football stadium, or whatever. I mean, they're gonna keep track because there's big money involved, especially over, say, a period of a year or 10 years. So, and all the shows, the two towns are up in the mountains in Kentucky, Hazard and Harlan. There was no box office.
So you talked about those small towns like Harlan and Hazard, Kentucky, up there in the mountains, and my grandparents are from southeastern Kentucky, so I've seen those mountains. They're no joke dealing with some of the fans. Jim Cornette once said that the worst—I don't want to say the worst fan, but the craziest fans were in southeastern Kentucky, and I guess anywhere in the mountains of Kentucky, really, and in Louisiana, in the bayous of Louisiana. You've been to both places. And so I'm going to ask you, would you just say they're just different kinds of crazy in both those instances, or is one a little crazier than the other?
Well, there's definitely a Hatfields and McCoys sort of vibe there. Yeah. Of people, the law is kind of a second thought. It's, who's right and who's wrong. The other thing about these towns is that, and now they were not big major monopolists, but the wrestling always drew very well. The houses were at least $10,000.
Nice.
And back then, ringside was $8, and the main event or the cheapest ticket was like for children might be $3. So the ticket prices were $8, $5, and $3.
Was that area of Kentucky like coal mining town?
Some of it, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, they were hard scrabble towns with bleak winters, not real glamorous, they were just down to earth place. And the people that, don't get me wrong, it's not everybody that came to the matches was the same, right. But there was a real element of, when there are people, if you got people upset up there, you might be risking your life because that'd be one of those places where they chase you out of town shooting guns at you. Mm-hmm. So, when you worked up there, I mean, when I was running the shows as a booker, I never did a hot finish that left everybody mad because it was just way too risky. The other thing was that Ron Fuller all he had was security. He had a main guy, can't think of his name, but he might hire one or two other guys, like civilians, not police, not people in uniforms, to help be security, just to watch the heels' backs as they went to and from the ring. But there wasn't police. So, and that was scary. Now, those towns, again, were volatile towns, but I don't remember ever having a riot there. Mm-hmm. I don't remember ever having the audience go crazy because, well, I mean, I knew the towns well enough to know when I was booking them, get the heat on TV. There was usually more heat at the beginning of the match. I worried about the wrestlers getting to the ring more than I did worried about them getting back from the ring because I very seldom. In fact, it would have been malpractice to do a hot finish in those towns. Now, in a place like Knoxville, where you've got plenty of security and you have the police, 8 or 9 policemen around, you can do everything you want. You can do it there. You can film it and play it on TV from there. And then you've got it. And then when you go up to Harlan and Hazard, no, you don't do that stuff because not only you have to get out of the ring alive, you got to get out of the arena and out of town alive. Yeah, those are some rangy towns. Now, don't get me wrong; they were great because the people showed up.
Right.
The towns were usually sold out. When we get into it, that's how I found out what was going on with the box office. Was because of the fact that the houses were always sold out. Okay. In fact, that was what was so nice about that territory, because it was great. They were doing great business. You were making good money, short trips, nice weather. And we spent a lot of time up during the warmer seasons, the fall and the spring and the summer. At least we could be up at the lake. Most of the guys had boats. And even after I don't know.
we got a story about a boat coming up here before too long, that's for sure.
You go up here, you talk about, a typical day. You could go up on a Saturday. You go up and spend all day on the lake, in the boat, out on the water. I mean, it'd be 3 or 4 guys. Ronnie Garvin had a boat. Ron Fuller had a boat. Robert Fuller had a boat. I don't remember who else, but 3 or 4 guys. And, you get together out on the lake. There's nobody you didn't have to kayfabe because there's nobody else out there. Or if somebody came up to you, you could always just split, take off.
Sure.
But you could have fun. We did water skiing and all kinds of stuff. I get together, tie the boats together and just party, drink a few beers.
Sounds like a fun territory, man.
Night we were booked, there was a little town right next to this lake, but there was a town on Saturday night. We were running a town that was about 10 miles from where the boats were, where our boat. So we're out on the lake all day. We pulled our boats into the marina and tied up, got in our car, still in our bathing suits, and put on shower shoes and a t-shirt, drove 10 miles to the arena, worked a show, and then I don't think we went back to the boats afterwards. I think we probably went home. But you talk about, what other territory can you do that in? So that place was heaven, in terms of having a lot of time, and not just free time, but something to do. Now compare that. I'll bring back Amarillo and the tarantulas and scorpions and tumbleweeds and a lake on nice boat on a lake, all kinds of things, pretty girls in bathing suits. Yeah, major difference. Now, let me ask you which one you'd rather work in.
Well, sounds like you found yourself a decent territory here. Obviously, the houses sound pretty good. You know some of the talent already. The guys you don't know, you seem to be getting along with as well. And then you guys have a nice place to go hang out. And it just sounds like a really fun time heading out to the Knoxville territory here. And you meet you do run into some guys you're familiar with. Ron Garvin, Don Carson in the territory when you get here. You remember Don way back when? Back in 1969, Don Carson. God, look at some of the other. Jimmy Golden, you had him in San Francisco for a brief spell. I'm going through the names there. Early on, you come in, as you said, as a baby face. So you're actually teaming a lot with the Fullers, with Jimmy Golden, and the main heel tag team during this time period. Anybody who knows their Southern wrestling knows this tag team. I'm talking about Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson. Now, Condrey would go on, a lot of people remember that name as one half of the original tag team under Jim Cornette, that version of the Midnight Express, Condrey and Eaton. And so they don't realize that Condrey had a tag team way back in the 70s with Hickerson, which was setting the South on fire anyway as heels. They were really great in there together. Yeah. Do you have any memories of Condrey or Hickerson?
Yes, I worked with them and against them. So I worked with them as a 6-man tag match a couple times, and then I worked against them. And they were good guys. I'd never met either one of them before, but they were nice to get. They were completely different guys, but they were a good team. Really, they were excellent in the ring. Their matches were very believable. They were good guys. They were. I don't remember having now down the road a little bit. I had to let them go, which didn't. I got some serious heat with them, of course, but only because they'd been there too long. But I'm trying to think anything personal. I rode with them a couple of times, and they never were long trips, but they were fun guys. They were fun to be around. They're good talents. I haven't ever seen Phil Hickerson. I've seen Dennis Condrey a few times since then, and he's if he had any hard feelings, he didn't hang on to them. So because he was pleasant enough when I saw him. He seemed sincere, good talent, hardworking, tough guys. Hickerson was probably weighed about 260, 270, and was he was a rugged-looking guy, and he was legitimately. I mean, I never saw this guy have to fight anybody, but maybe that's the reason why they didn't was because they did look rugged, and they were tough. People decide who they want to pick on. When heels sometimes show that they're afraid, that it tempts people to take a shot at smacking them or something, but these guys never had that problem. And they were a good draw. I mean, I think they were main event a few times. It would be like a Saturday night spot show. They might be the main event, and the single match might be a co-main event, but they would be the featured match. So they were good, and they were there when I got there, and they were over like crazy when I got there. But after I'd been there 8 or 9 months, they wore out their welcome in the sense of having been there too long. It was time for them to go. I mean, that's just nature of the business. I was booking, and you're watching the matches every night. Well, anyway, I haven't gotten to the book yet, have I?
No.
So, well, I'm working as a babyface, and it was fine. I was I was able to hang around with Ronnie Garvin. We became pretty close, and it was good. It was a nice time. In my personal life, I'd had a girlfriend, the girl that I ended up marrying. Her name is Molly, and she's gone now, but rest in peace, dear Molly. But she had come to California with me when I first went out there to work for Shires. We drove together from Florida out to California, and she stayed out there with me for 3 weeks, and then growing pains, getting to know each other, whatever. I sent her home. I didn't break up with her, but I sent her back to Florida. I had her drive a van I had purchased. I had her drive a van back to Florida. So anyway, now it's a year or so later, and we're not together. In fact, we're not dating at all. Okay. But when I was in Knoxville, and this is my personal life, and that's part of it too. When you're talking about your whole experience, without being needy or grasping or whatever, she stayed in touch with me in a very pleasant way.
Okay.
And so what happened?
So basically what you're saying is she was mature.
Yeah. And what happened is I had her come up she lives in Fort Lauderdale. Mm-hmm. So it's not that far. I had her come. I flew her up a few times. And after the second or third time she came up, and she'd come up to stay a week maybe with me. And after about the third time, now there were plenty of girls in Knoxville. Everywhere you go, I mean, especially a territory like
most
that.
Most cities have females in them. Yeah, I gotcha.
Well, let's put it this way. There were a lot of groupies. I'm still not going with the arena rat description.
Well, at least you finally brought yourself to say the word, at least.
Yes.
We're getting there.
I was paraphrasing my partner here. But, there were a lot of girls there, but it's hard for someone who's been around a while to develop affections for someone that has been with, say, 100 people.
Half the roster.
That But after about the third or fourth time she came up, I realized that I didn't want her to leave. So she stayed up there with me, and we never were parted again after that. Mm-hmm. We'd been together. We were together 43 years when she passed away, and so that was momentous because when you have a banquet in terms of like a smorgasbord of possibilities in terms of choices you can make about who you want for female company, but you pick someone who you have feelings for. It makes a big difference. And I was much happier with her there than I was when I had been single and playing around, playing the field, so to speak.
Hanging out with Ron Garvin.
Yeah. Well, Ronnie wasn't a big playboy. He could have anybody he wanted to. Ronnie usually didn't go with the female wrestling fans or the groupies. He would pick people and flirt with them and somehow get them to. I can't say it on the air, but he had a way of talking that he would say hello. He would say, instead of saying how are you, he would say how's your. He would mention a part of their anatomy that's below the waist. Let's put it that way. How's your blank?
How's your ankles, Toots?
How your kneecap? It's between the belly button and the kneecap. Let's put it that way.
All right, I gotcha.
and he was saying, I mean, he did a couple times. He did it in front of me. I couldn't believe it.
I wish I had known that pickup line in my 20s.
He could get away with it. My jaw dropped down about 3 inches. When the first time he said it in front of me, he's talking to some dignified-looking young woman, who's a bank teller or something, and I'm going, oh my God, but very few. If people got mad, and some of them did, some of them, well, then he'd say, oh, I was just kidding, but he said, I see you don't have a sense of humor, so he would say, I'm through with you. A lot of the women he said it to would blush and say, well, It's okay. And I remember I was in the bank with him one time, and he said it to his teller, and I turned red as a beet. And about a week later, I saw him and the same bank teller get out of his car and go into his apartment.
Go, Ronnie, go.
Yeah. So, I mean, it worked. I mean, she wasn't a groupie.
Right.
So I only tell that story because that's kind of how Ronnie was. He wasn't, well, he'd been in the business. Or by that time, he'd been in the business about 20 years. He might have had a time when he was groupie in it every night. I don't know. But I think again, the story I told earlier, personal satisfaction in terms of your emotional needs are not really met by having these meaningless.
Right. That situation was more of the exception and not the rule of how Ronnie Garvin handled the ladies. I see.
Yeah. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So,
well, all right. We have totally went off topic here, but what a story I'm sure everybody enjoyed anyway.
Sorry about that, man.
No, don't apologize. I just learned a new pickup line. I hope a whole lot of people just learned a new pickup line. Guys, shoot us an email, DM me, let us know how it works for you. If you're accosted, do not credit nor blame Bob Roop.
Oh my God! Well, Ronnie's an exceptional. He's still around. He's an exceptional.
Yeah, he's
exceptional character. He's a
hell of a talent too. Loved watching him growing up.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
You enter Knoxville, your first night there, your first match is actually at the Civic Coliseum, so you're right there right away in the big time, the big city. This is the main town in the territory, Knoxville. Imagine that, the Knoxville territory, the main town is Knoxville, Tennessee, Civic Coliseum. Oh. And I'm looking at the very first night. You must come in on a very big night. You just happen to arrive in time. I look at the preliminary matches, and even those are pretty damn fun here. Obviously, you show up. You're working Tony Charles, but also Bearcat Brown versus Boris Malenko. Ron Wright taking on Dickie Steinborn. Don Carson versus Rip Smith. But then the main event, look at the talent that's here already established. You talk about Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson versus Jimmy Golden and Robert Fuller for the tag titles. Right. Mongolian Stomper, Archie Goldie versus Ron Garvin, which would become a main event, or is even right here, but it's only to be outdone by the NWA World Champion, Harley Race, in the main event coming to town. Harley taking on Ron Fuller. So talk about a stacked card here. Your first night in the territory. Yeah. I'm sure the house was booming. You're like, all right, I like this.
Oh, yeah. It was a nice Coliseum, and it was really good. It was conducive to pro wrestling. I mean, the way it was arranged. A lot of times, like if you have a stadium, like a football stadium or a soccer stadium, a lot of the fans are so far removed, and a lot of times you can't hear at all what's going on in the ring. And those indoor arenas, like the Knoxville venue, even the worst seat in the house, you could still see everything that was going on, and you could hear what was not when the crowd was screaming, of course, but it was it was kind of an intimate arena. It wasn't humongous. It was big, and it was Knoxville's a major city, but it was it was a good place to have wrestling. And that first night, starting out like that, you go, oh yeah, as opposed to my first night in the Cow Palace, where a year or two earlier, where I walked out and the building's 3/4 empty, and 3 or 4 people on the way to the ring are telling me what I'm going to do in my match. And nobody's excited about anything. And to go from that to a couple of years later, my first night in Knoxville, I got a good reception when I came out there basically cold. Just being one of the so-called good guys, I got a hand, not just a polite applause. Well, part of that, I think, maybe I was able to create that a little bit, at least create maybe the potential for excitement, because my work was pretty good by this time. And I could have a good match.
Well, you're in there with Tony Charles, so I'm sure you guys were having a good match.
Tony Charles could have a good match with a broomstick. And that was always the reference you had. Oh, he could work with a broomstick and have a match. Now, I did see Ronnie Garvin work with the Invisible Man, but
right.
But no, working with Tony was a night off, and it was fun. That was one of those. I was with someone who I was friends with, who I admired and respected and liked. What a pleasant all those English boys, Tony and Les Thornton and
well, maybe not all of them. You did mention Billy Robinson's tendencies a little bit, but most of the English boys, right?
Yeah, most of them. Yeah, well, so the guys I ran into in Europe and working in Europe, most of them were also very pleasant. You did have your exceptions. I remember being in a bus full of English boys, not full, but 8 or 9 wrestlers going up into. We talked about this before, going up into Scotland, and one of the guys on there was a grump, and that one grump kind of took the joy out of the whole setting. Except there were 2 or 3 guys, lightweight guys, 170-pound middleweights, who were ribbed the hell out of this big heavyweight who was so dour. Well, I'll give you an example. One of the jokes this one young guy told, he was talking to this dour wrestler. He was married, and he had this fixation about his wife. He treated his wife like she was a saint. When he spoke of her, he spoke to her, she was like almost royalty of some kind. One of these 160-pound wrestlers asked him, he said, "Hey, you got any pictures of your wife naked?" And this wrestler hunched up and, he started off, of course pictures of my wife naked, of course I don't. And the 160-pounder said, "Well, I got some. You want some?"
Wow.
and he said it just before as we were pulling up to the stop. As he was walking out the door as he said it. "Well, if you want some," he said, "I've got some." He took off, and the big guy took off after him, but he couldn't catch him. But that kind of sense of humor I can appreciate. I enjoy that kind of stuff. But Tony was a tough guy too. I mean, you didn't want to mess with him. He would fight you. He told me a story or two about people. They called it taking liberties.
Right.
People trying to take liberties with him, but nice
you'd
guy.
You'd be a fool to try to take liberties with Tony Charles. Okay.
Yeah. Well, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He was only, I guess, 5'9", 5'10", about 190 pounds.
Looks can be deceiving, right?
Oh, yeah. He was solid muscle. So, yeah, good guy.
So your second week there, you worked Tony Charles your first week. So your second week, you go from one of the consummate professionals in the ring to a guy really just getting his start. And it would take a couple more years for him to really catch on under another name. But here in 1978, you work a guy by the name of Sylvester Ritter. And later on, you're going to run into Mr. Ritter once again in Bill Watts' Mid-South territory. But by then, he's going to be known as the Junkyard Dog, and he's going to be main eventing. The fans in the Superdome going to be chanting, "Who dat? Who dat? Who dat say they're going to beat that dog?" But here back in 1978, he's just Mr. Sylvester Ritter on the preliminaries, taking on Bob Roop. No doubt you're going to score the win here as your push begins. Sylvester Ritter just kind of hanging around. Did he remember you in your matches here with him in Knoxville? Did you guys ever discuss that at all? Like, "Hey, I remember you," or was there any kind of appreciation from this time period working with Ritter?
Not from that episode. What happened was later when I was a booker. I don't know how many. It doesn't matter. But at a later period, within the next 6 months, he came through there and he called me. Got in touch with me somehow. Maybe he came to the matches. He was going out to Mid-South. He was hurting for money, and he asked me if I could book him so he could get a payday just to put gas in his car. So I booked him on TV, and he did a job, of course. I think he made $25 or whatever, but he didn't forget that. He remembered that the rest of his life. When I got out to Mid-South, he treated me like I was his long-lost brother, and that's one of the reasons I've expressed in the past my admiration for him, because he wasn't a fair-weather friend. He was a guy that if you did something for him, he respected that. He treasured it, and he considered it something that made you someone he cared for, because he paid me back, I don't know how many thousands of times over, just by me being able to work with him in main events a few times in the South. So he was as impressive way back in Tennessee as he was out there in Louisiana, physically.
Right.
He was big and muscular and, impressive. Nice, very mellow. He wasn't in any way frightening, but very presentable in the way he presented himself and It's just a class act. And doing the favor for him was something I would have done for a lot of people, because that's the way boys help each other out if they can. But I was happy to do it for him because he was very appreciative. And boy, you talk about doing a small thing, having it get big returns.
Right. Yeah. Doing favors for. Well, they say, you be careful who you're kind to on your way up because you might meet them on your way back down. And I'm not saying that's exactly the situation here, but here you were, Bob Roop booking, and Ritter, Junkyard Dog, comes to you and says, "Hey, Bob, can I get a little work here? I need to save up some money and head off to my next territory." And you're like, "Yeah, man, we can fit you in here." And obviously, Dog does not forget that when he runs into you again in 1981-82. And that's kind of a fun story to look back on. And that really just tells the tale of everything you ever hear about JYD. Of course, he's going to have some demons to battle later on in his life, but nobody ever said anything bad about the Dog in regards to the human being. Like, he was just one of the greatest guys to be around.
Good-hearted guy, yeah. And literally in Knoxville, when he was broke, he was on his way through. He was driving to Louisiana or to Mid-South, and he was broke. He was out of money. So, he had a few bucks, but he needed to buy a tank of gas. He had a tank of gas. If he'd asked me to loan some money, I probably would have given it to him. $50 or whatever. But, I liked him. Even when he was Sylvester Ritter, no big name or anything, he was a nice guy. He was big and impressive. He obviously worked on his body. To get as muscular and as strong looking as he was. And he was a class act. He presented himself well. He was a nice guy, and he didn't beg me for work. He just asked me in a manly way if I could help him out, and I was glad to do it. You got a guy like that you can put on TV and have one of your guys beat him. Hell, that's great.
Yeah.
Someone of that that size, and nobody knew who he was, but that doesn't matter. When you see Godzilla come out there, it doesn't matter if you know whether his name's Godzilla or Lizard or whatever. It's impressive. So,
right.
Yeah, it was good to meet him that way or to run into him that way. I had forgotten I worked with him.
Here in Knoxville? Yeah, that's well, you worked so many talents here, and he was just, Sylvester Ritter at this point. It's a lot easier to remember working JYD than it is working just a random guy on the card is what he was at this point in time. But that's kind of fun to go back and kind of, realize that, your long story with Dog, because you're going to feud with him in Mid-South, but seeing you here working him, and that happened a lot. A lot of guys worked each other in various territories, but seeing Ritter here for what he is in 78 versus what he's going to be in 81 when you see him again, it's just night and day, and it's so fun to go back and just kind of look at these type of things.
Well, if you think about it this way, we're talking about finances, but how about in employment favors? He did a job for me on TV, and I went out there in Mid-South. I did about 50 for him out there, which I was glad to do. If you're working Dog,
if you're working with Dog, you're getting paid, right?
Yeah, you're getting paid. What? You want me to go over Dog? No, I don't think so. We don't want to kill the golden goose here.
Yes.
I have to get my hand raised. Let's figure some way to do it where he looks good. Maybe he's the one raising my hand after he put me in a wheelchair.
It's kind of funny you said that too, because I don't have the names in my head right now, but I remember at least one, if not two people mentioning in the past where the idea for them to go over on the Dog, maybe steal a win or maybe just a count out or DQ or something like that. But they went to whoever was booking at that time for Bill and said, "Are you crazy? You got to put this guy over out here. You don't want to kill this crowd or piss them off to whatever level, depending on what city they were then in there down in the bayou or whatnot too." But yeah, so everybody saw, well, obviously the golden goose was JYD in the Mid-South, but again, back here in 78, not so much, but just very cool to see you cross paths with them.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was. And that was it's one of those moments in time, a fortuitous moment a lucky moment where circumstances bring you together. And isn't it ironic? He was broke, looking to get to Mid-South. When I called Mid-South to come out there, I was broke. I'd been out there working with the Papos. I was broke. I didn't need to borrow money. I had enough to put gas in my car, but I went in there broke. So it's interesting how fate works. I mean, you never know.
In the world of pro wrestling, it was good to know Junkyard Dog, right? I mean, he was one of the guys you would want to know, right? So he remembered and he put it in the word. Yeah, man, that's a good dude, Bob Roop. Bring him on in, Bill, and the Cowboy. He's no fool. If he can make a couple bucks off you, he's going to do it, and that's what he did. You guys had some fun matches out there, and your feud with the Dog, your feud with DiBiase, and your feud with the Orndorff at the end there before Paul was on his way out. So we talked about all of that in the past, but yeah, it's good times to go back and reminisce about the days of old with the JYD. But as I'm scrolling through the results here, I'm not seeing you in the ring with them a whole lot, Bob, so I apologize I didn't mention this name to you off air. I don't like to catch you off guard with too many names, but there's a name here that's sticking out to me early on in this run. Guy by the name of Ricky Gibson. And for those of you who don't know who that is, it's the brother of Robert Gibson, Robert the younger brother of the two. They were the Gibson brother tag team before Robert would go on to team with Ricky Morton and form the Rock and Roll Express. But by all accounts, including a young fan, Jim Cornette in the past has said, there was almost no one better in the ring as a babyface than Ricky Gibson. Now, that could be a little favoritism, Cornette growing up watching guys like that, but at the same time, I've heard time and time again, until Ricky got into his accident, injured his leg, he was never the same after that, but a lot of people say one of the top guys to never make it beyond, this level of the business was Ricky Gibson. Do you remember being around Ricky Gibson at all? I remember you telling a story about talking to him on the phone or something along those lines with Jimmy Golden out in San Francisco, but do you have any stories on Ricky Gibson?
Yeah, well, the story about him and Jimmy Golden actually did take place in Knoxville, but he was there, and he was a great talent. I've said this before, but it might bear repeating. If I don't remember a match, it's because obviously it went well. It was at least okay. The ones I remember are ones that got screwed up, or I got hurt, or somebody got hurt, or it was a total abortion. Just terrible. I remember those, but I do remember. I have a sense, and I remember watching Ricky work. He was very good. He was believable. I mean, you didn't have to really stretch your imagination to see him being capable of doing the things that he did in the ring and believing them. I mean, the way that a heel would react to what he did. Mm-hmm. I mean, some people you see out there, and, if you had Darling Dagmar, run up to Andre and hit him on the shin and have him fall down and give up or something like that, be hard to believe that, but Ricky had the presence. He had ring presence, I guess, is one way to put it.
Right.
He looked like he belonged out there, knew what he was doing, and very easy to work with. And good, you know what? I never had any problems with him ever, anywhere. So I think he had his head on straight. Now, that's not to say he didn't give somebody else problems. I have no knowledge of that, but it wasn't because of anything I did. I think it was just because he was a professional. So, he was fine. He was a good hand. I'll retell that story about him and Jimmy Golden down the line somewhere.
Yeah, I'll mark it. We'll save that one. We'll use it here during this Knoxville, but it makes sense to tell it again here soon. And kind of new context as well, because we're actually here in the Knoxville territory at this point. So it's gonna be fun when we get there. I see George McCreary also coming through Knoxville while you're here, so you can't get away from George.
He came to Knoxville to see me.
Is that what happened? He came to visit? Got some work while he was up there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all he had to do was call me. Mm-hmm. When I had time off there in Knoxville, I would go over to Saluda, North Carolina, where he lived. He and his wife lived. They lived on a lake, had a little cottage on the lake. And
right.
Beautiful, very private. And I'd go up and spend a couple of days. We had 2 or 3 days off, I'd go up there, and wasn't a very long drive. I'd go up there and spend a day or two with him, just because we all went to college together. Although I knew him. We were teammates in college. Although I didn't know his wife very well from college. They weren't married yet in college. I had become to know her, and she was just really a sweet, sweet woman that I grew to love like I did George. So you want to talk about a way to get out of the business that really didn't make you feel strange. George was smart to the business, and his wife Kathy was too. So I could visit with them. It wasn't like it'd be like if you're in the military and you have military and you have civilians who are not military. There's a big difference. So if you're in the military and you're on leave and you're in some place where you're among civilians, you feel like a little different because you got this attachment. Well, with George and Kathy in their place, I didn't feel any kind of difference because they were both smart to the business. Mm-hmm. We could talk about it if we needed to, or we could tell stories about it. But George had these great stories. You could tell they were all funny as hell. And so I had the privilege of having them, they were friends, personal friends. So anytime I heard George called me, oh yeah, I'd be glad to book him because I always asked him if he or they would stay with me when they came to town because they were so much fun.
There's a period here early in your run in Knoxville where you're also making the Memphis loop, doing just the city of Memphis. I'm assuming the Mid-South Coliseum or whatever they were running there in 78. Yeah. That would have been for Jarrett, right? In 77, Jarrett splits from Gulas and becomes his own entity full time.
Well, when I went to Knoxville, Robert was the booker. You knew that, right?
I just assumed the Fullers worked together as the book, but
Robert was the booker, and he might have been the one sending me to Memphis. I don't know. I don't remember how I got booked there, but you see your bookings, and okay, there's like I said in private. Well, there on Tuesdays there's the Bear, and on Wednesday you're in Memphis. On Thursday you're in Miami.
You didn't ask questions; you just made the drive.
Yeah. Yes. So you start figuring out your gas allowance. I went over there, and I liked all right over there. I mean, the nice building and all that, but I was never interested in working that territory. First, I don't know why. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Lawler never asked me to when he was kind of the king up there. I had matches with Jerry Lawler, and they were always pretty good matches. And he was really over, and I guess I was over. I don't know how I was over there, but I mean, I don't know why I was. Maybe they got to TV somehow, but yeah, we had good matches, and I don't know if we were the main draw or if we were just maybe part of a double main event, but the houses always seemed to be pretty good. So
if Lawler was working, they typically were, and if you were working Lawler, it was likely the main event, maybe the semi-main, depending on what else they really had going on in the territory at that time. But during this period here in 78, you actually work a couple of matches at least with Tommy Gilbert. And for those of you who don't know, yes, I'm sure you're familiar with the last name Gilbert, but it's a common name. But indeed, he is indeed related to one hot stuff Eddie Gilbert. In fact, Tommy Gilbert, the father of both Eddie Gilbert and Doug Gilbert, who has his own podcast right here on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert, who goes back and tells stories about his father, about his brother, and of course himself. And much like you, Bob, he has plenty of road stories as well. So
right, we're on the same page. Yeah, I don't know why they would. I don't think was he a big name over there?
Tommy was at one point in the early and mid 70s and whatnot. He was one of the main stars over there in the Memphis territory. Okay. So he was very well known, and he would stick around for off and on for whenever they could use him. And he would come in and out, and he would eventually go on to do some refereeing in the mid 80s, working for the Cowboy. And he was really good at it because he had been a worker for so long. He knew exactly where to be in the ring. One of the really underrated as a referee because he never made it to the big time, like the national WWF and things like that. But Tommy Gilbert was a good hand all around in the world of wrestling. But it's really odd because you go over there, you work Tommy a couple times, you work Jean-Louis, who was a French-Canadian, teamed some with Joe LeDuc at one point in Memphis. But outside of that, that's it. You come in, you work Memphis for about a month, and then it's just Knoxville all the way. Though you do start winding up working in Chattanooga for a bit. Do you remember that, going into Chattanooga?
Yes, I do. A couple reasons. One was working with Lou Thesz.
I see that.
Which was, it was an honor. Lou was still very, very, good in the ring. I think he was probably, 65, 70. But you couldn't tell it. He had his hair was still dark, and he was in great shape. And we had a good match. It wasn't with Thesz. You didn't do high spots where you have him come off the ropes and hit you with a tackle, or you hit the ropes and give him a tackle. You would wrestle. You would do wrestling. Where mostly holds and in and out of holds, and maybe I worked with him, I don't know, a few times, and you never took over on him and beat the crap out of him for a while, like have him down and put the boots to him or anything like that, which made it difficult because sometimes it was hard to get heat on him. But it didn't matter. I had a good, just working with him. I sound like a mark here. I mean, like I'm a groupie myself, but to me, he had been world champion. I think he'd been in the business 50 years. So working with him meant something to me. Well, just something. It was a real positive thing that to add to my career.
Most definitely. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it's all a work. Nothing's quote unquote real. But at the same time, this guy was many times over world champion for years at a time. And much like Bruno, it got to the point where they kept going back to Lou when Lou was like, I don't want to be champion anymore. I've been there and done that. And I kind of just don't want to be on the road like that. And they kept throwing the money at him, or whatever the case was, that they kept talking Lou into coming back and being world champion again and again. And he would continue to be. And yeah, okay, at the end of the day, they're giving him the title, but Lou was a shooter. He was a hooker. The name of his book was Hooker, in fact. But
right.
Lou could go, but I think that says something for you in any sport or any television program. If you're the main factor in whatever somebody's watching, whatever somebody's paying to come to see, you are legitimate at what you do. And so even though pro wrestling may not be legitimate as a sport, it still means a lot to say that I got to go in there and I got to work with the best, Lou Thesz.
And plus, having Lou Thesz shake your hand and salute you by saying, good match, meant something. Because this guy had 10,000, 15, 20,000 matches already.
Right.
So, and he'd worked with everybody in the world and everywhere. So I read his book, too, years ago. He has some great stories. And I still see his last wife, Charlie. I see her at the Waterloo reunion, saw her again this year. And, I had the privilege of a few times he worked. I remember one time we went to the Bahamas and maybe on from there to Puerto Rico together, where he was on a card with him. I had a chance to visit with him a little bit, get to know him and experience his personality, what the kind of and he had a reserve to him because he was older for one thing. Than most of the guys, but Ole Anderson told me a story with Lou that is maybe emblematic of the kind of guy he was. Ole was traveling for some reason. He went by, he called Lou Thesz. He said, hey, I'm going to be driving by. How about I come back and say hello? And Lou said, fine. And so he went to Lou's house and they were talking about this and that. And Ole said something about, Lou talked about a hold or something. Anyway, for one reason or another, they got together. Lou had a room that had a wrestling mat in it, and they got together and Lou was going to show him this shooting hold. So they tie up, and the first thing Lou does, he headbutts Ole right in the nose, and Ole goes down, and Lou grabs an ankle, puts some horrible hold on him, and had Ole tapping the mat in like 3 seconds. He sat up and holding his nose and said, what the F did you do that for? And Lou says, hey, never take any chances and never miss an opportunity. So I thought that, I only laughed. I mean, he didn't break his nose, but I thought it was funny. I was never tempted to go visit, and I never wanted to go visit him.
Any of those old-timey guys that used to have the wrestling rings or the mats, and you always hear about Stu Hart in his dungeon, right? Those are the guys, right. It's like, maybe I don't want to go down in the dungeon. Maybe I don't want to give you my arm. Yeah, I could see in that situation. That's a fun story, though. I don't know that I've ever heard that one, Thesz and Ole.
Oh, no.
Talk about a different eras coming together there. That's fun times. That's great.
Ole didn't get mad. He laughed. Yeah,
that would be something Ole would laugh at. I got to use that one.
Yeah.
Oh, now I've learned two things today. Ronnie Garvin's pickup line and, Lou Thesz doesn't necessarily need to grab a hold to take care of business there. Very good stuff here. Couple more names I want to try to get into here. If you don't have anything on them, that's okay, because I got a long list of things to talk about. But some other guys that are working the cards here early on when you're here, and you may have something on them, you may not. One of them was Ron Slinker, who basically worked the Southeastern and Florida territories mostly. Do you remember Ron at all?
Yeah, I do. Ron was a good guy. I never, if he made it where he was a main event guy somewhere, I don't know about it. He was always kind of a mid-card guy.
Yeah.
Wasn't really impressive physically, but I just didn't, he didn't have, this is unfair really to me to say this, but some guys have that presence, that ring presence that looks like they belong there. Ron was a good talent. Don't get me wrong. He was very efficient and proficient in what he was doing. I just don't remember, and you would know this much better than I do. I don't remember him ever being like a main event guy.
No, I mean, unless the territory was really struggling at the time, he may have floated in as, just a makeshift main event guy. And I'm not trying to put Ron down. Ron was a karate expert by all accounts outside of the ring. He won 30 freaking tournaments. I mean, so he knew his martial arts, right? But that doesn't necessarily always translate to the pro wrestling world. And he was and as you said, perfectly capable hand. He could go through a match and you're not going, oh, that was a stinker. It's funny, it rhymes with Slinker. Right. But at the same time, it was the ring presence wasn't there. You talked about the ring presence of a Ricky Gibson, and I don't think Ron ever really developed that.
No. And isn't that funny, though, ironic funny, that here's a guy who literally is deadly or potentially certainly knows how to hurt you in a variety of ways with hands and feet, who looks like 2 cents waiting for change,
Right.
Yeah. Except you better not try to take those 2 cents out of it.
And we go right back to looks can be deceiving. You talked about how the short stature of Tony Charles. Well, you don't want to mess with Slinker either. He was good at the martial arts, in an era where not a whole lot of people were learning that. And so he was not somebody to be messed with, I'm sure, outside of the ring. But I was just curious your take on if you remember him, because I know he comes through Florida, and I wasn't sure if he'd come through Florida when you were booking or if he was there anytime when you were there in the 80s as well. Because I know Slinker's going to finish up probably by that point in his career, if I remember correctly. I don't remember seeing him in results beyond that time frame anyway, but I did see him here. He's going to work here off and on through your tenure here. So that was somebody I wanted to bring up because I don't know when we would get to him again.
Right.
Gorgeous George Jr. Do you remember Gorgeous George Jr. at all?
Yes, I do. A couple reasons. I worked with him in the States, and he was also in Australia on a tour I was on. And I might have told the story earlier, but he got into a beef in a bar. The next morning, the morning after, all the wrestlers would come down to the lounge for breakfast. He came down. He had like a bump on the side of his head, his eyebrow or something, and his lip was split. So I asked what happened, and he said that 3 or 4 guys jumped him or something like that, the typical. But he ended up making a big comeback and running them all off.
Okay.
And, everybody accepted that, no problem. Except the bartender in the club I just happened to be, I'd become friends with this guy. I can't remember exactly why, but I had moved out of the Texas Tavern, which was the place everybody stayed. I was rooming with this bartender guy. So he told me the story later that what had happened in the bar was, and I'm sorry about this, George, but George was in the bar drinking, and he was sitting at a table with a couple of girls, and he kept going to the bar to get drinks, and he would just kind of elbow his way in there, and just like, hey, I'm a big star here, and everybody move out of the way. And apparently a guy who weighed about 170 pounds a couple of times said, hey, mate, how about being a little more respectful or whatever.
Right, yeah.
And George just ignored him. About the 4th time he did it, the guy blasted him. George did not make a comeback on that one, so he stayed blasted.
He wasn't booked to make the comeback there, huh?
Yeah, I saw him years later. Came to one of Scott Teal's get-togethers in Tennessee, and he had grown a lot of beard and looked completely different. And, it's good to see him.
Yeah.
He was a good talent. I worked with him a few times, and I don't remember any horrible mishaps, but, Gorgeous George Jr., Gorgeous George had his shtick was the robe and the bobby pins and the curled blonde hair and the valet with the perfume atomizer going around spraying the ring. That was George Sr., the original George.
Yeah.
Who, made it to the very top of this. He worked on shows with Jack Benny. This guy made it.
They say he sold as many TV sets as Milton Berle. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so he was over. And I was always curious why Gorgeous George Jr. didn't incorporate more of that. That was what got the original Gorgeous George. That's what got him all the attention.
Right.
And heat or notice, whatever you want to call it. And I think he got heat because he always acted like he was completely disdainful of everybody. I think he would have his valet spray the audience as they went by, because that's signifying that they stunk too. So, he would have a ton of heat. And once he'd been a journeyman wrestler before that, just somebody he knew when he went in the ring, and once he took the robe off and the bobby pins out of his hair and all that, once he got in the ring, he did the same thing as he did before. Only now, because he was now Gorgeous George, it meant a lot more than when he wasn't, when he was just George, whatever his last name was. So I was curious why why Junior didn't incorporate more of that showbiz type thing into his, even to have a really showy robe or something, which he didn't, at least not in Australia. But he was a good hand. Again, I don't remember. I don't know if I ever saw him in a main event, but he was a good hand. Somebody to have on the card. I never booked him, but he never called me and asked to be booked either. So I would have booked him if I needed somebody, but it probably wouldn't have been as a main event heel, or I don't know, maybe babyface. I don't know.
Fun little story, that I read many years ago online about Gorgeous George Jr. It seems to be accurate. When you listen to it, it's like, well, did that really happen? But story goes, he was working for Nick Goulis at one point, and he got fired. They were live on air television, and he referred to George Goulis, the son, as a sniveling little shit right there on TV, and that did it. That was the end of it. Not only did he defame George Goulis, which is probably the real reason why he was fired, but he said shit on live TV in the 1970s. Can you imagine that back then? Did you hear what he just said? Oh, man. That would.
Oh, I know.
And I know he got into some issues with California, too, because they were going to try to book him out there. I don't remember if it was the LaBelles or Shire or who it was, but somebody was going to try to book him out there doing the Gorgeous George shtick. But, that was Gorgeous George claim to fame, especially in the West Coast, Los Angeles. And so his wife was still living at that point, and she sued, and I guess she won that lawsuit to keep him from doing the gimmick in the state of California anyway. So he was unable to do whatever it was he would have done. So those are the things I know off the top of my head in regards to what he went on to do. And he was, fairly successful in tag teams and things like that during his era.
You mean the wife of the original Gorgeous
Wagner?
George?
Yes, the original. Sued.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I don't blame her. Maybe. Probably with her husband passed away.
Yes.
His stature and memory is one of the things that she's got to give her comfort and solace in her widowhood. So I could see her doing that. Again, nothing negative to say about George Jr. Except that story about in the bar. I've told about my own stories about looking like having bad things happen to me from misadventures from my own ignorance or whatever. And there's a few, believe me, there's a few still to be revealed in future. By this time, you think I would have learned better, but I keep making them. So anybody out there who thinks I'm being mean or whatever, I'm as hard on myself as I am on anybody else. And these are not stories that reflect on character, really. It's just on the things that happen. And our deal is everybody's seen the wrestling, the matches themselves, and seen the wrestlers the way they're presented. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what happened behind the scenes as seen by me, and shared by you, Ray, and your research and everything. You might know more about me than I remember, but together I think we're doing. So when I say things, so many of I'll go back to the thing in the Carolinas this past year this is just typical. We're talking about Gordon Soley. We're talking about Florida. 5 of us: Jerry Briscoe, Steve Kern, myself, Brian Blair, and
Kevin Wright.
We're talking about championship wrestling for Florida. Well, they bring up Eddie Graham, and then they bring up Gordon Soley, and between the two of them, everything's great. Oh, it's wonderful, everything. And we had about 100 people that were there because, the people who had paid to come to this fan fest, who are now we're giving information to. And all we're talking about is, oh, great, great, great. They leave out the part that Eddie Graham ended up taking his own life. And Gordon Soley is basically a miserable person. I'm not the one that made that up. I'm not coming up. That's what actually happened.
Right.
And not to include that in any story you tell. How can a story be accurate if you don't bring that in somewhere? Even if it's at the very last. Mm. So that's why I tell these stories like about Gorgeous George Jr. It's something I know about him that happened, unfortunate, but it's a lesson for all of us. I got smacked a few times, so I got shot at. I had people pointing guns at me. So, everybody, we all, if you were in the wrestling business, if you were a heel, you were going to have things happen because you asked for it, really. You got on TV and said horrible things or did horrible things where thousands or hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people can see what you did and you don't expect a reaction from it. Well, you're living in fairyland then. But anyway, thank you, Ray, for letting me digress.
No, you're totally cool. While you were doing that, I was listening to you, but also kind of scrolling through the results, looking at some of the other names that were here when you first got here. Don Fargo here, so that had to be a fun time.
Yeah.
Also, I noticed about 6 weeks after you arrive, Kevin Sullivan pops up in the Southeastern Territory as well. So you guys just set the world on fire over there at the Cow Palace for quite a few months through the summer and fall, almost really into the winter of 1977. And just 6 months later, here's Kevin back in town in the same territory as Bob Roop. Do you remember if you had anything to do with that, or was it just Kevin's talent that got him booked here and it just happenstance that you guys are back together again in the same territory?
I'm not sure how he got there. I don't remember bringing him in, but by the same token, Ron Fuller possibly might have come to me and said, hey, I'd appreciate it if you would book Kevin Sullivan. I don't know if he would have done that without asking me, because when I took over the book.
Well, how fast did you take over the book? Because this was very shortly after you got there.
Well, I took it over because you mentioned earlier, Ron had another territory down there in Alabama. Mm-hmm. And Robert had been booking Tennessee.
Okay.
Robert went down there to book, and that's why that's the main reason I got the book. Ron Fuller knew I had experience booking, and once I was in the territory long enough, and once I got over, that was the main point of do I get over? Once I got over where I was drawing money, and you make it clear when I'm talking to Robert Fuller, I've been a booker too, so I could talk nose to nose. Talk on an even level with him. Mm-hmm. And I had all kinds of ideas for my own matches, so that I brought to him, and so Ron knew that I had the ability to do it. So, and also he was there. If I couldn't do it, between us we could probably get it done. But what he didn't realize, I wasn't just me, and we'll get into this too. But I had Garvin and Malenko. I had a booking threesome, and between the three of us, you're talking a total of about 60 years of experience. So yeah, and Robert left, and there's a story with that too. And I don't know if it's time to get to it.
Actually, that's pretty much the way I suspect we're going to open next week's episode, unless we come up with something else in between. Because we're going to continue on this story, the early part of your run in Knoxville here, when things were going right, things were going smooth. Business was certainly the booming, and the talent was there. And it's, by all accounts, it's not really a talked about territory in general, but nobody ever has anything bad to say about it in regards to the fans, the money, and maybe the payoffs weren't there, but I mean in regards to what was perceived to be being made by the promotion based on the fans that were in attendance. You talked about even in Harlan and Hazard, they were bringing the crowds in. So
right,
that's something to think about.
Yeah, the thing that I'm analyzing the difference between Florida. I think the payoffs were in the same ballpark as Florida, because Buddy Fuller was Ron Fuller's dad.
He kind of knew what the pay system was, I would imagine.
Yeah, but the thing is, in Florida, you were doing twice the miles every week that you were doing in Knoxville.
Yeah.
In Knoxville, you had a lot of time off. I mean, I had time to go out and work. Even when I was booking, I had time to go to the gym every day and work out.
Well, what they would call nowadays is mental health day, right? Like you taking a day, right? So.
Yeah, and it was lovely. It was great temperature. It wasn't too hot, wasn't too cold. Nice people. I was born in the South, so being in the South I'm comfortable anywhere, but there's a Southern way of life that's a little bit different, and like the northern areas are a little more faster paced, whatever. But It was very pleasant there. It was just pleasant. The fans were good, the boys were good. We had a good get together. Having Ron Wright and Don Wright, who we haven't talked about yet much. We did talk about them in terms of story about some absolute unbelievable activities in terms of their settling disputes. But having those guys was great because they were local guys, but been there forever.
Yeah,
through about 4 or 5 different promotions. What a great well of information to draw from. I talked to Ron Wright all the time about stuff, about what they did. I got all kinds of good ideas from him. And, he was a real character. He and Don both they were both stand-up guys. You talk about some guys with guts, ambition. These guys were, they lived in a town. They lived in a town of half the people were armed, and they were heels. And they never tried to be baby faces.
Right.
So, yeah, these guys had a lot of guts, and they were good guys too. They were nice people. I mean, they were decent. They were decent people.
Well, I tell you what, man, we got a lot left to talk about before we even get into what a lot of people would call the good stuff here later in '79 in Knoxville, because we still got to discuss. You talked about there may be a story involving Robert Fuller leaving from the book job here in Knoxville, heading down to Alabama. Of course, you're going to get the book. We're going to talk about you taking over the booking and maybe some of the ideas and things that some of the storylines we'll try to jump into in regards to what you were doing when you were booking with Ron Garvin and Boris Malenko helping. Also, we'll look a little bit more into your heel turn here, as you're not going to be babyface for very long, just maybe a couple months or so, and try to go through the summer into the fall, look at some of the other talent coming in, maybe some of the talent you brought in. I'm scrolling through right now, just kind of getting an idea of what we're going to run into. We all know Bob Orton Jr. going to appear before too long. I'm assuming that wasn't just a happy coincidence either, that Orton's going to pop up here later on in 1978. So lots to get into next time as we continue the fun ride through 78 in the Knoxville territory.
Well, one last thing, a little preview for Robert Fuller. Now, currently, Ron Fuller's been knocking me for, 30, 40 years on a regular basis. I don't know what his problem is, but Robert recently has tried to be a peacemaker. He stepped in and says, hey, that's all in the past. Let's forget it, whatever. Mm-hmm. But at that time, he didn't like me very much, and he showed it in a couple ways. One of them had to do with putting me in a place where if I had gone where he wanted, I would have been surrounded by copperhead snakes that I would have stepped right on top of. And the other thing was with one of his bookings. He booked, of course, he was the one that he booked the last week before I took over, and that last week was interesting. So we'll get into that next time. But again, I don't hold any grudges.
No, and I'll say this in regards to Robert. Maybe just the years are behind him, the maturity and all of that goes along with life in general, and it is a long time ago. On top of all of that, but and I don't even want to say recently, but there's an interview with Robert where let's just say that he doesn't necessarily disagree with some of the accusations you made when you guys were getting ready to leave the territory, and we'll leave it there for now. But we'll bring that back up when the time comes. So, that's out there. I just want to put that out there. But yeah, Robert Fuller was, certainly had his opportunities as booker. He's going to get that all the way into the 1980s for Memphis and Georgia and things like that. So not going to be his last time with the book here, as he's going to be departing Knoxville and you're going to be taking over, but we'll touch on that next time, Bob, and a lot more, because there's a whole lot more to talk about here in your time in the Knoxville territory. But want to thank you. You did it again. We threw a list of names at you, and just love some of the stories here this week. And again, if I wasn't already married for, I've been with my wife for almost 18 years now, I try to use that pickup line that Ronnie Garvin invented all those years ago. Well, I don't know if he invented them, but he certainly perfected it, apparently. So,
well, always if you're going to do it, stand far enough away that you can't get slapped.
Yeah, figure out their reach, right? Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
You don't want to do it with an orangutan.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a good one. Well, thanks, Ray. Man, time flies when I'm talking with you, my friend.
Oh, it's always a great time, man. And we got so much more to talk about, so much talent and so many things going on, even in the Knoxville territory. It's not New York. It's not Florida. It's not Georgia. It's not the Carolinas, but it is a hell of a talent, territory for the time period. The talent in here right now is amazing. And so we're going to continue on with this next time around.
Well, we're doing exactly the same thing they're doing all those other places. We're just doing under a lot less media coverage.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So, well, thank you, Ray. And listen, anybody listening to this, thank you very much for being here for us. We enjoy telling these stories. Without you, we couldn't do it. So thank you again.
All right, and that's going to do it. Closing up shop this week. Going to be back soon to continue on the story here of the Knoxville territory. Just a reminder out there, you guys can friend Bob over at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow me over at facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. Over 21,000 followers right now on Facebook and counting. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.